What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, and thank you for checking out this episode of the Keep Klimbing podcast. Back today with my man Brian, and we're gonna talk about. We're getting into May here. For the younger players across the country, really, they're getting into some like high leverage, high intensity games. High school seasons kind of wrapping up for some, and others getting into the postseason. And it's a good topic. It's a good topic to talk about how to keep your arm health and keep it fresh and keep it going through high like intensity outings, having high leverage outings back to back, and how to deal with some of those like workload concepts, I guess, as the games are kind of keep stacking on each other, one after the other, of like, for a lot of these kids, sequentially coming here, this, at least in their head, will be the biggest games they've pitched their entire lives coming up, and it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, and I think especially now this season with Class 5 and 6, I think the bullpen guys, you got best 2 out of 3.
Yep.
You're gonna have bullpen guys.
Yeah. And the coaches are going to use you. And really the same thing's going on across college baseball right now too. All of the, really everywhere except professional baseball, because the spring seasons are all kind of coming to an end because the school calendar years are coming to an end. So it's actually very, the concept is very, widely distributable, I think, amongst high schools, from JV to varsity, to colleges, from junior colleges all the way up to your P4 schools. It's the same thing really. And they're all dealing with ultimately the same concept or environment, and a lot of this stuff, as we've talked about numerous times before, comes back to the foundation that you've laid, the foundation that you've laid, in the weight room, the foundation that you've laid with your arm care and extracurriculars, I would call them, outside of your throwing program, but then all the way back to like what kind of foundation you laid in your throwing program all the way throughout the off season. And that's the purpose, of all those things, and to intentionally build them with incremental doses of stress and workload added so that we can be peaking, this time of year, and not feel like we're peaking on March 1st, hard right out of the gates, and it's like a controlled fall all the way out the rest of the season, right? I try to paint seriously. I try to paint this picture for people. I've been there and I've felt that. So you laugh, but that's real. Yeah, that's real. But we get into May,
you start spiraling. It's like, how do I
stop? Yeah, you're on ice skates, But truly, you want to be going like this in concept all the way throughout the winter and off season, so that when you get up here, and the reality is, I think when we zoom out, we understand what a periodized schedule is. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, a periodized schedule, it just means that, obviously we're all human, we all have peaks and valleys in our performance, in our metrics, in our whatever, just because a guy, gets labeled as throwing 90, he doesn't throw 90 every time out the chutes, and then, in a positive or a negative type of way, right? Most of the time, I think what people end up hearing is like, oh yeah, I throw 90. But it's like, well, you threw 90 once, go look even some of the best pitchers in baseball. Paul Skeens right now, when I was younger, is when in Max Scherzer's heyday, and he's still a rock star, but you'd see some games with the first or second inning, he'd go out and he's like 91 and 93. We're like, what's going on with Scherzer today? It's like, no, man, you don't really understand. Just because he does throw 97 or can throw 97, first off, he's not doing it every time out of the chutes, because it's intentional, and second off is that, you just can't expect yourself to be at peak performance every single time you go out and take the ball, right? So I know everybody's probably familiar with this to some extent, but you got a guy that, says he throws 90 because he threw 90 in a game or two, but then you see him most of the time he's like 86. If you're that guy, you do yourself some favor telling everybody that you actually throw more like 87, 88, and then they'll be surprised when they see the 90. That's not the way the world works. So that concept, of trying to get the guys to understand, get players to understand that, that periodized schedule, has peaks and valleys through it, right? From the way you feel, and a tough thing, I think, to wrap our heads around as the players is that, how you feel isn't always exactly a one-to-one correlation in what the actual numbers say. I've gone out and pitched games and man, I feel like crap. And they're like, dude, you're throwing hard today. I'm like, oh shoot, actually, okay, sweet, and vice versa. I'm like, man, I feel great today. It's like, oh yeah, you're only throwing whatever, so So I think not wrapping too much up into how you feel in the moment. I think like, understanding maybe how I feel going into the game. Like there's some elements of that as a pitcher is that like, very simply that like if I felt my fastball was down a little bit that day, I'd probably confirm it was down, once I got older
Mhm.
because I knew better about not to associate entirely the feel to the numbers. But those would be more days that I threw more off speed pitches and hitters counts because I know I don't got that extra life on my fastball. I'm not hopping it by guys like I do maybe in
Right.
other games.
I think it's
You know.
interesting you say that because sometimes, mentally, you don't feel as good. You're just, your mind, it just kind of, you relax a little bit through that. You're throwing a little more
Mm,
free and easy.
mhm.
And it just becomes,
No doubt.
just that it's almost an extension of that. Sometimes you're pumped up, you're hyped up and
Yep.
whatnot. You're a little more
210.
tense,
Yep. Two
right?
tens. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and unfortunately, that like I tell guys to like kind of take the same mentality that you would like take like chopping wood. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? You wouldn't take this like I'm gonna go real fast, because you'd get tuckered
Right.
out real quick. But you also, trying to get the job done. You wouldn't go and just like lazily hit the wood, right? Like you'd take a nice controlled as aggressive as possible as you could control the effort level. And that's kind of where we want to pitch or even hit at, right? And kind of trying to take that, attitude and take it all the way through a game, take it all the way through a season, that no pitch needs to be any more exerted effort or definitely not any less exerted effort, and I think that's where the sweet spot guys really need to get to.
There's one thing here, because we try and go through some of these topics and whatnot for us, but there was one thing that is interesting, popped in my head. So hope you don't mind. Stuff that just goes,
Yeah.
but here we're talking about this. We're in this part of the season, high school kids especially.
Yeah.
How much is nutrition going to play a factor in your
So much.
ability?
Yeah, oh my goodness, so much. Really, really, like nutrition is a very big piece of the puzzle to the overall, recovery methods for a player, right? It's a
Hmm.
very big piece of that. Nutrition, hydration, supplementation, that entire like recovery cycle, and ultimately go back to like our periodized schedule. A lot of things within that periodized schedule is very intentional,
Hmm.
especially from a program design or a coach's standpoint is that like you're I've said this before in earlier episodes like you're trying to appropriately dose out stress isn't necessarily a bad thing but you're trying to do it in increments so that we can do it as safely as cautiously and as intentionally as possible, right? So think about like that periodized schedule typically ends up looking like this, right? Like I
Yeah.
talked about my schedule like big picture wise, we want to take this type of mentality to it. And definitely when you look at the off season or certain times of the year, you can certainly look at a schedule like that. But the reality was once you get into the season, it actually looks more like this. So that, if this is like November or October, whatever, like it's gonna start real low, it's gonna really increase. And then it's gonna kind of get to the point to where like it does this and you're
You're
riding,
porpoising
yeah, you're
almost.
you're riding the wave of the season, right? So on the upswings is the applied stress, whether that's a game, whether that's in your throwing program, in your lifting program, whatever. And then on the downswings is really where we need to be maximizing our recovery time frames. And recovery gets thrown around so loosely these days that yeah, the biggest buckets to fill in that for a young player, and I was just horrendous about this, and I would say that most
Most
kids
kids.
are, right? Is that you're drinking enough water,
Hmm.
you're eating enough food throughout the day, which if you're skipping breakfast, you're not,
Hmm.
enough food, but then even like understanding maybe how to like construct a plate of food that one of the biggest things, especially from a muscle and recovery standpoint is like getting enough protein, for
Right.
these guys. So we try to tell all of our guys, like a good goal, benchmark goals that you could have as a player, and this is a ton, right? This is kind of like set your goals high, and if you get somewhere close to it, like you be all right, but if you tried to drink in water every day, um, in ounces, your body weight, you'd be in a pretty dang good spot. Now, you know,
Yeah.
I'm 200,
180
I'm
pounds.
205,
Right.
210 pounds. Like if I did that, that's
That's a
probably
lot of
a lot.
water.
That's a lot. And I don't think that like you need to necessarily get to that. But like if you're 160 to 185 pounds, like yeah, you get into 150 plus ounces of water, especially when you're going to go out there and sweat your butt off, especially when you're
Yes.
depleting your entire system after a start.
And
Like
that's every day, right?
every single day. And if
Yeah.
you do that 1 or 2 days a week, That's not good enough, and I don't think that we even just as humans in a society understand how much water that we actually need to be drinking to
Right.
optimize it like peak performance.
Yes.
And then so that's a huge one that I think totally gets missed, huge piece of the bucket. Yeah, nutrition standpoint, how much you're consuming and macros, macronutrients that you're consuming, which would be like your carbs and your proteins and your
Hmm.
fats and your, those types of things.
And slow carbs, especially, correct?
Yeah. As
I
many
mean, I
as
know
many
I'm
like
getting a
whole unprocessed
yes.
carbs as you can get.
Yeah.
Not carbs like white bread or the bread that's on your Chick-fil-A sandwich. Like that doesn't count. you know. So so yeah, but yeah, learning those, and then I'll tell you what, the other biggest one that I think gets missed the absolute most by everybody, especially younger players, is sleep. They don't sleep enough. Our body
Hmm.
breaks down all day and it recovers when we sleep. So, if anybody watching this, some type of encouragement to fill those recovery buckets up, man, drink water, eat enough protein, and get 8 hours of sleep every night. And if they aren't, that's some of the hardest stuff to put your finger on as a coach because you don't see them when they go away. Like you
Right.
don't really know what they're doing at home.
Right.
You want to talk about too, like very easy ways to separate yourself from competition. No one's going to know about that. No one's going to see that. You're not even really going to be able to measure that very good, you
Hmm.
know? But I bet I guarantee you that you'll see a longevity difference in purpose there by taking those things serious, that especially as you go in levels. And this is all relative for everybody because I think everybody feels like, at some point the even if you think you're like uber talented, and even if you are uber talented, like the talent level catches up with you. And
Right.
once that happens, you find yourself in a scenario where you're like, well, what do I do now? Because like like some of these dudes, like
Right.
I just threw harder than everybody when I was younger, and yeah, now I got to pitch. Now I got to pitch.
Yeah.
Now I need an off-speed pitch. Now I need this. Now I need that. So even for your like most talented kid that steps on the field in St. Louis this year, like it's gonna happen to him too, and that might be happening for a bunch of kids on like the JV team too, and that's totally cool and fair and fine. The concept is exactly the same. What are the extra things that you can do that you need to do to separate yourself when talent's
Yes.
equal, and that happens for everybody, all kinds of different
Absolutely.
ages, right? Those recovery things, I love that you brought that up because I think those are the things that go under the radar most. Now, relate all that back to our topic for today.
Sure.
Yes, we're in May,
Right.
and you see fatigue things starting to pop up right now, injury things starting to pop up right now. You see some guys still, full steam ahead, like barreling down and just dominating. Again, like I said, it's tough to say, and it can be from a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different variables that go into it. But those factors, I think recovery factors go into it. I think like the off-season platform that you've built up to it, the workload management within all of that, from week to week, from game to game. Whether that's amount of throwing or lack of throwing between games, like all of those things play a really key factor into all that. That yeah, you start throwing in some of the biggest games that you've pitched in your life, from
Right.
from high school baseball to college seniors who may never pitch again, right?
Right.
From guys that are starting once a week and trying to go 7 innings and whatever, leading their team, to the guys that's got to throw 2 or 3 times every single
You
week because
may throw on 3 days
you're a
rest.
critical piece out of the bullpen. And yeah, I mean, the coach is going to come to you, and this happens all the time. This is baseball. The coach is going to come to you and be like, hey, Brian, you good today?
Right.
And I mean,
And if you're a
99,
competitor,
yeah,
you're going,
ninety-nine
I'm good.
percent of the
Good,
time,
coach. Let's
the
go.
world is going to say, let's rock and roll. You know what I mean? Like, I'm ready to go. And we're just not hardwired that way. Now, there's certain elements where I wish, myself included, would have spoke up better about, am I actually good today? Because I think that you you know skewing that at all in the coach's mind actually does a disservice to your team and not a service to your team like you
Right.
think it feels. um
But
but yeah,
it's
you're getting into May and these games are critical.
World Series last year.
Yeah,
Dave Roberts
yeah,
said it.
take the ball.
Walker Bueller
Yep.
said, yeah, I'm good. And he
Yeah,
goes, I felt terrible.
yeah, absolutely.
But he went out there and was able to,
Yep.
that's another level
Yeah,
thought
for
process
sure.
in competition,
For
to
sure.
be sure.
And look, I have this conversation with a lot of people a lot of times. I end up getting phone calls more when things are going bad than when things are going good. which is
Agreed.
natural.
Yeah,
Okay.
it
But
is.
this is a common piece of conversation, for what we do and how we support players. And it's such a challenge for me because I get it. Like I've totally been there. I've totally taken the ball, or at least offered to take the ball in certain environments when there's just no way I should have been doing that.
Mhm, mhm.
And there's circumstances where it's like, yep, I'd do that again 10 times out of 10. I'd look back at it and I'd say there's circumstances where I was like, yeah, that was pretty dumb. So I think you kind of have to know like what those are and
Right.
be willing to accept the risks that come with it, and if that's worth the reward for you. And that's totally different for everybody, you know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
if a state championship is important to you, then go do it, and
Yeah.
to be honest with you, that was like one of the times I look back at, like, holy cow, what was I doing? But a state championship at 18 years old to me was extremely important, and I wouldn't change anything of what I did, and it worked out fine, and here I am. Arm was good. It was all
Yeah.
good. And there's so many stories like that where it is all good, where people can look at and be like, well, so and so did it, or these other guys that did it with them too, or whatever the case may be. That
Mhm.
that it's challenging to balance all that, because each scenario, each circumstance is just so unique and different. Each person is so unique and different. That a lot of times too, especially with injuries specifically. We said this before we got on. It's like, man, I've known plenty of people who have done everything right, and you're like, this dude is a stud, like absolute workhorse, still got hurt.
Yeah.
Like you just won't be able to put your finger on it.
No.
So, and I do personally believe you can't go throughout your whole athletic career like thinking or being scared to get hurt. You know what I mean? You got to push the envelope in some places. So,
One of the things you said there struck me, and I would encourage you. You're watching. Think about doing this. Whoever you're working out with, if it's you know premier pitching performance, whoever the case may be, when things are going good, maybe keep a journal. How does it feel?
yeah.
The thought, because we sure do all that. I loved what you said, and it's unfortunate that we talk more about the negative
Yep.
than we do the positive. And when positive's going, we're just kind of going through it and having
Yep.
fun and enjoying,
Yep.
but not taking that same level of thought process to when it's going well
No doubt.
as when it's going bad, right?
Yep. I think a great rhythm for everybody to get into athletically, especially for baseball players, and I'll say even niche down further, especially for pitchers, because to me, as a hitter, hit ball hard, you win. Okay, you can keep that real simple,
Yep.
and you keep hitting ball hard, it'll find a hole. Okay,
Yeah.
for pitchers, man, some of that stuff can seem so gray or fluid at times that, like, man, I like felt like I threw the ball pretty well today and I gave up 4 and 5 innings, like I didn't really pitch that good, and like finding different ways that you define success as a pitcher, I think is
Mhm.
critical in that. But like, man, you can walk away from some games and be like, I didn't throw the ball very well today at all. And here I am 6 2/3 with 3 runs and 6 strikeouts. And everybody, yep, I mean, kept my
And we
team in
win.
it. That's a
Yeah.
good game. We
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You could have, an opposite stat line. But writing those things down as a pitcher, a good rhythm to get into is, I would say, after every single game, if you're a hitter, after every single at bat, you know, if anything, because it helps the thought stick better.
I agree.
For me
Agree.
personally, just writing it down would make me remember better. But
Mhm.
then also, there's gonna come a time, and like, so I started doing this actually in A ball too, and I got the encouragement from a professional coach of mine as well, and I started doing it, a couple different things. It helps you become your own best coach, and I think that should be every player's goal, right? Coach yourself,
Right. Right.
understand yourself, understand the game, become your best coach, your own best coach.
Be able to
But
feel what you're doing.
yeah, but the season is so long. You go through so many things, and it's such a finicky skill-based game
Yeah.
that there's so much variability to like the wins and losses of it, that like there's gonna come a time where, like, it's July and I'm like, man, I was feeling real good in March. Like, where did that breaking ball go? Or like, why am I not able to do right now what I was doing in March? And you start to kind of like look and search from some answers, and you're working on things. You're just trying to work through it. I mean, it doesn't need to be some big over analytical. I'm in the dumps right now, but like it comes and goes. That's just how it is. It's too skill based for that. It's not just like I run a I run a 6.5 60, and I just run that every time that I go out. It's that would be very
Mm-hmm.
physically
Mm-hmm.
based, like it's so like nuanced and skill based that there's so many like little fine details to it. So write something down after every outing. If anything, it'll help it stick in the moment, and like this was good and this wasn't. Good one game summary. But I promise you, you've got a whole notebook stacked up of months, if not years, of thoughts, post game thoughts, pre game thoughts of like what I was trying to do and then how did I do it. That's basically all I wrote down. It was like goals for the outing, and you know, afterwards I'd draw a line on the page and write down how I thought I did. And then in August, you can go back and look, or maybe it's not till next March and you go back and look at, well, in August, here's what I was doing and felt really good on.
And this is something I think not, and this isn't about making excuses or whatnot, but here, just from a high school perspective, I've been at all these fields. I've been on them. I've been umpiring them, been at them. Go to Timberland one day, it's 52 degrees, and you got a 20-mile-an-hour sustained, and you're feeling it because you're sitting up there.
Yeah.
That will affect your pitching.
Absolutely.
You go the next, 2 days later, you're at, say Liberty, or you're back at home if you're Howell or Howell Central or whatever the case may be, especially Howell Central, you're kind of down
low.
Doesn't matter as much, but it's 70 degrees, sun shining.
Yep.
No, and it's, those are variables too that make a difference, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And trying to like objectively look at all those things, I think that's some of the hardest part to do. As any type of athlete, like you are your product.
Yeah.
So it's hard a lot of different that's challenging a lot of different ways, like to not have your identity wrapped up in who you are as a baseball player. Like that's just a emotional, like
that's not an excuse thing, but those are things that are variables to what you're doing, right?
From it and objectively analyze it as if it were another person, because it's so emotional for us that like it is us, but like it's not who we are as our identity type of thing, but yeah, I mean that's why it makes it hard, so yeah, I mean all of those types of things, I think being able to look at it and like self-reflect, look yourself in the mirror and say like, actually, how did this go today?
Right.
And to be honest with you, I think I don't think that you should be like cruel to yourself by any means, and I don't think that you should be, patting yourself on the back all the time. But I would say that it's probably better, and I've seen more people be successful with being more critical of themselves than maybe less critical of themselves. Like because you're just,
if
I
I'm grading
this myself, like I was my own worst critic, like no doubt about it. Like and when you're doing that, it at least puts you in the frame of mind of like constantly looking for improvements. Even if you go 7 innings and you throw hard and you strike out a bunch of people, it's like, well, what could I have done better? And you look at all of these long time super successful coaches like a Nick Saban or somebody like comes to my mind, and they like beat the brakes off of somebody. And in the team huddle afterwards, it's like, well, here's all the things we did wrong. It's like, dang, coach, bro, we just beat them by 35. But that's how it's like, that's how it's wired, is that like there's no we're always just trying to get better every single day. And if you threw 2 innings yesterday and you walked the house and you got yanked away earlier, or if you threw 7 shutty yesterday and dominated and all the scouts loved you, then then the next day's approach to that has to be exactly the same.
I liked what you said, because being objective, how do you do that? What's the objective? You have to, pitching is the objective, not you as a person.
Yeah, outcome.
Right?
Yeah, how'd you do?
So
how'd you execute?
If you can take after a game, and I think it's, like you said, this is difficult, but then you're looking at things and like, you're just looking at the pitching. I'm looking at this inning. There was 2 walks in there.
Yep.
What is done differently here as a pitcher? What is done differently as a pitcher?
Yeah.
The object is pitching. So you look at those things and you say, this is the object, not to walk people, no free bases.
Yeah.
So if I can eliminate one of those walks, I've done what I needed to do within that structure, right?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we do this even just like with our training programs too, in our assessment process. And it's the same in that like objective measures, is that like, see what happened, what's the outcome, where are we at right now, and keep asking yourself, well, how did that happen, how, right? Like, and you'll get all the way down to like, yeah, well, okay, I chose to throw a breaking ball on a 1-1 count and I missed. And yeah, if I throw a fastball right there and even if he hits it, there's nobody on base, I've still got a pretty dang good chance of getting out of that, as opposed to throwing that pitch and now it's 2-1, and then everything just kind of starts to snowball from there. So you can kind of get back to like really critical moments within the
Yes.
game
Yes.
of like, okay, and there's your learning point, right? So then
Right.
when I get out there the next time, there's so many different scenarios within the game. And I'll tell you that especially pitch calling or pitch sequencing is also hindsight. I've seen so many people go 1-1, throw a great breaking ball down. If you execute it, everybody's like, you're the best pitcher ever, And if you don't, it's like,
And you
oh,
hang
that's
it.
what you messed up with. That's what needs to be different. Like, okay, yeah, your execution needs to be better with it, and
Mhm.
and understand that if your execution is not good with it, someone's going to have to say something about the approach that you took with it.
Yeah, and if you're looking at that, you can look through a game and you can say, you know what? I did not execute that curveball here, here, and here.
Yep.
5 times. I didn't execute that pitch as well. So that is something that I've got to step back and look at this objectively and say, how am I going to execute that pitch better? I've got to, this is something to work at.
Yep.
And it's not a matter of looking at the outcome as a negative. It's looking at the outcome as something that says, okay, this is the next step.
Because the next time you go out, you very well could just throw that same pitch and execute it, and everything's good. It's because the outcome or the execution
Was ugly.
of it, wasn't necessarily what we needed. So then it snowballed from there. So yeah, you may get in that scenario and feel that that's the right pitch again. But if you're on that type of thought process, when you go to throw a 1-1 breaking ball with nobody on base in the third inning after your team just scored 2 runs, that'd be a good shutdown inning. Okay, that's like some of the scenarios I see some of these kids getting into. It's 1-1, nobody on base, your team just scored, and you got the 8-hole hitter up, and you're gonna throw a 1-1 breaking ball. Now you throw it for a strike, you end up striking that guy out. You look great. You're popping your chest, you're catching the ball back from the third baseman.
Give out the old
hurl. Yeah, you're looking good. Okay, but if you don't, and that snowballs and gets sideways from you, then that would be a very easy thing that a pitching coach would look back at and be like, man, we just got to attack that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like attack that guy with your best stuff. Now, like a lot of people would say or think that just means throw a fastball. It doesn't, because the frame of mind the next time could just be a little bit more heightened sense of awareness that if I pick to throw a off-speed pitch or whatever you would consider, some people it is their fastball, whatever you would consider like your not your best strike pitch, not your number one strike pitch. If you got 4 of them, it's just not number one. Okay, strike pitch. And if you go to throw any of the other ones, it's just a little bit more heightened sense of awareness that like I got to be on the white of the plate for this. I'm not trying to throw that pitch like down there perfect dotted, like attacking it.
And here's the thing: is we're heading into the playoffs. We're talking about this, and kids, that your arm might not be as maybe as strong as it was. You hope it is and whatnot, but as you're talking about these pitches, okay, you're getting into a larger or a smaller segment talent.
Yep.
Evens out here at this point. You're starting to play this where you weren't able, you thought you were. You're throwing that curveball, you're throwing that breaking ball, you're throwing that changeup, and it's getting fouled off. And you're feeling good about it. Yeah. But then you get into this next level games, you're into district championship game. Yeah. All right. And have you really been honest about your stuff? And you throw that breaking pitch that's been getting fouled off or maybe some weak contact, that. But this is the number 3 hitter on the number 3 team in the state.
Yeah.
And he crushes it out of the ballpark. And you're like, wait a minute, what just happened?
That's why objective, really like self-critical like assessment process of that for you post-game, that's uber important for sure. Just kind of know where you stack up in the big picture of things and your overall performance. And because improperly that guy in that scenario is kind of fluffing himself up maybe a little bit more than he should, and the game's going to kind of get him, and more of the way that we would hope it gets handled is that like, okay, yeah, I mean, you need to just understand maybe how your stuff fits in all of these different circumstances that you're going to be in, and not just like we say as pitchers, not just like chasing fingers, like catcher throws something down and you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to do it. And you're just like chasing fingers, like you actually have a little bit of a forward thinking of like, well, what do I need to do with this?
Yeah.
What do I need to do this? I want to go back to kind of what we were talking before. This is what I was just pulling up. And you brought up a really great point of like, the reality is throughout the season. So I'm gonna go back to my
Your
periodized
wave,
scale,
right?
right? Like if we go up and then we get into the wave, the reality is that throughout the season, this actually starts to tick down slow.
That makes
Okay.
sense. That
I'm gonna
makes
I'm
sense.
gonna read this. Dalton Schumer is a physical therapist at SSM, and they're based out of the Premier Building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dalton also does performance coaching with us and does a lot of our rehab stuff. And he obviously rehabs people at SSM. Really great. And this is actually funny that we just brought this up. The season is a controlled fall. Arm care regimens are non-negotiable. External rotation, your scaps, your mid traps, your low traps in this study, all of them diminish throughout the course of a season, strength and movement quality. That's why arm care regimens are non-negotiable, because from a movement pattern, we're trying to keep and sustain movement quality.
Strength
And then from a
falls.
strength standpoint, we're trying to like keep up and maintain the overall strength that we've built, like either throughout the off season or different parts of the season, right? So like this is a study, parascapular strength profile changes in collegiate baseball pitchers over the course of a season. Okay, is that so go back to my picture here, right? Like you take this kind of mentality throughout the off season or early part of the season, you kind of get into this periodized where you're riding the wave of the season. You're still probably in like March and April, you're adding innings, you're adding workload, you're adding stress, but yeah, by this time of the season, especially all the way on through the summer months of baseball, that like strength and movement quality, because of stress and workload, diminishes. We just don't want it to diminish so much that we get into like risky environments. And we also don't want it to diminish so much that um, we put ourselves in just like a higher, you know, risk of diminished performance or increased risk of injury, right? So all of those things, yeah, by May, if you just straight up thought about it, if I ran a mile every single day from March 1st to May 31st, like there's going to be peaks and valleys in that where I feel like, dang, I'm tired. There's going to be some times where you probably feel a little bit better, but like, yeah, at some point once you're built up for it, and it kind of your performance is going to kind of diminish because your recovery can't really keep up with the workload demands that we're asking of it. And now, like, while we want to limit that as much as we can, I'm going to go
Yes.
ahead and say that's just baseball season.
Right.
Okay, like we
Right.
just have to pitch games. We have to play games. We're going to play throughout the entire season. Professional baseball, you're going to play 140 to 160 to 180 games if you do really well,
Right.
like, and how do those guys keep up with their body and their physical performance? You're going to play 50 games this spring, like there's guys, now they're grown men, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But look, there's 19-year-olds out there playing a professional season right now that
Yeah.
they'll tell you after they get done with that first season. I've been there, like, holy cow, that was a marathon.
Wait a minute.
You
What did
know?
I just do?
Yeah. So take it with a grain of salt. But like at the end of the day, there's people out there playing baseball every single day right now. In a lot
Mhm.
of these spring seasons, at a college light, they're playing, and really this is kind of the same even for our high school guys. I was gonna say college schedule, but it's all very similar now, where you're playing like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you play Tuesday, Wednesday. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so you got a little bit more built-in recovery times because of the schedule. You got built-in recovery times because the high schools, like, they don't play on Sundays most of the time.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I wanted to bring that up because it's something fresh that I just read from Dalton that he put
I
out
love that.
on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, it's going
So
to diminish.
you're just trying to limit
Hold on
the
to it for as
speed
long
of
as you
the
can.
fall, right?
Yes, because additionally, I guess to tack on to that is that, like, the rate at which those gains,
The rate of decay.
yeah, the rate of decay, absolutely. We put something out about that, like, not too long ago. I don't know how quickly I can find it. I don't know if it'd be good to try to look for right now, but like basically it was all these different categories, right? Like aerobic performance, strength, power output. Those are all different energy systems, right?
Sure,
That like
sure.
somebody could be real strong but not real fast, or real strong or not real explosive, or whatever. Somebody could be a distance runner or a sprinter, right? Like there's different types of, and like basically all of those different energy systems, some of them decay as quickly as 5 to 7 days
Really?
without doing them. Some of them, the longest ones were like 30 to 35 days without, performing activities in those. So,
That's
yeah, I
not a
mean,
long time.
no, yeah, and so I think a big picture flaw, especially as the younger the player gets, issue that we have in baseball, in all kinds of sports, is that most kids think of training as off season, competition, as in season, where really it should be like a decent blend throughout the entire course of the year. Not suggesting you have to do a 12-month training calendar, but that like there's different objectives throughout each month, and depending on the age and the dynamics and whatever, is that like, I was just talking with somebody about this yesterday, actually, that like, man, like, yeah, once I got to professional baseball and the in season was 7 months out of the year and the off season was only 3 or 4 months out of the year, it's like, well, just from a sheer time standpoint, if I just spent more time training for 7 months out of the year, not for 3 or 4, like you'd get better with the 7. So
Right,
how much
right.
more important the in season seemed, just from a sheer time capacity. And now, like, it took me to professional baseball maybe to like look at that, understand that, and realize that. But it's the exact same. If you're a high
Yeah.
school kid, you're gonna play March 1st and you're gonna play summer ball all the way through August. Like the amount that you play certainly is different. The travel that you have to do is certainly different, and it's different from person to person and team to team, and honestly even like kid to kid on some of that, because if I'm pitching, a lot of the teams now you can just like drive down for the game you pitch and whatever, and it's like a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those dynamics that like go into that overall like controlled fall, if you will, that you got to keep up with.
At this point in time, and that's where I think maybe a kid, feels a little bit less, and you go into that ball game in district, the first game, and you're like,
Hmm.
man, where do I get my energy? Where do I, and
Yeah.
understanding that process of moving you through. Do you
Hmm.
want to be successful late in the season
Right. That should be
as
your goal.
as opposed to,
That should be your goal. Yep.
because it's always interesting to me, in high school sports, it's nice.
Mm-hmm.
You want in some of these, you want a good seed,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you're a good baseball team, you're a good baseball team.
Yep.
You might have to play the top but somewhere along the
Yeah.
line, you're going to have to play the best
Yeah.
competition,
Look at Major League Baseball in the last couple of years, and like all the stuff that has changed in how people like construct their rosters.
right?
It revolves around the premise that like we just got to get into the postseason and then be good at the right time, because there's been a lot of people and owners that have realized that we spent all this money, got into the playoffs, and we still just lost in the division series.
Right.
That game, postseason for any type of level of baseball is like there's so many like variables, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of times where like the best team doesn't come out of it, like on paper,
Right.
because a baseball game, man, anybody can show up and beat anybody on any given day. You get one hot pitcher and like there you go, you win 1-0. So yeah, I mean those details as a coach, as a player, from the player standpoint, it should encourage you to take more of a zoomed out approach,
Mm-hmm.
and get some of your stuff in that, today's game is only as important as today is. And, next game, we're going to keep like building all the way through that and trying to get a little bit better every single day. Like I said, whether that's physically, mentally, skillfully, emotionally, whatever. Right. And then from a coaching standpoint, like maybe zooming out and understanding like that, those dynamics, if we go out and are able to accomplish something, that is good, like in the moment, and big wins like in the moment, and all those things are valuable, because I also think from a team standpoint, like you got to learn how to win too, so you're juggling a lot of things and it can be heavy at
Mm-hmm.
times. But that if I do anything in March that messes up my May, that's a tough sell. If I do anything in April that messes up my May, it's a tough sell, because you
Yeah.
just want your guys firing on all cylinders. And like I said, I think most of that stuff is also hindsight. There's a lot that's because again,
We
take
could
that.
have done this.
Well,
Yeah.
take the recovery methods in the play too. Like you just don't know how they're sleeping, eating, or drinking. Like you don't know, and maybe you do the exact same thing with this kid that you did with that kid, and you know maybe they're very comparable from a metric
Mhm.
or a body type or a personality or whatever, and you think it's a good comp. Like there's just so many variables that could be different about this player that, like, to be honest with you, I don't know that you would know. You wouldn't start asking some of those questions until something went wrong.
Right. Right.
So
And
it's
that was
tough.
I like that point early on, I never you think about some things and then you don't because you're always really aggressive in a negative moment.
Yeah.
But having that aggression and I mean that in a positive
Sure.
way towards your success
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
The players that are most successful do take more of an approach like that. Now, it's the way that we're wired as humans that I start
agreed.
looking into things more when things
Right.
are going bad, and you're just kind of a little bit. You could still be very diligent in your process, and like I'm not saying there's any sort of less than focus or
Mhm.
physical preparation, from outing to outing and having success, but that like you just feel the weight of it a little bit more when the performance or the outcome isn't there. That you know it's not really that, like, yeah, I've been there, to be honest with you. Like, I've been there, that like it's not really that like my focus or energy in the weight room or in the bullpen mound was any different. But I tell you what, I probably slept a whole lot better that night. What I mean? In between outings,
Yeah.
I probably didn't sit on the couch and look at game video.
Like, man, what am
Like,
I doing? What am I
yeah, yeah. So like, and to be honest with you, all of that can be super detrimental too. That like that's how things snowball on people.
Yeah.
So
And that to me, this is me as a person. See, and I think this is what we have to look at these things in this respect. Now, some people may not agree, but from a biblical standpoint, and I take these things very seriously, it's the same thing in life. We always look at the negatives,
yep,
right? We're always, well, something went bad. What went wrong? What was wrong? Instead of being present and understanding when everything's going well, and I think there's plenty of things within you know our faith to understand those things that Jesus talked about in that respect. How do we continue to be successful when success is happening and holding that mentality, being able to hold on to that, learning how to do that? And I don't think we stress that enough.
yeah, no doubt.
Learning how to hold on to success
Yep,
and what that takes to
yep,
be that type of person, right?
yep. Every day, just show up and try to get better, no
Yeah,
matter how yesterday went. Every
absolutely.
day, show up and try to get better. And if you're not in that frame of mind, you won't be looking for things to get better. Because when you're in that frame of mind, you are aware of what needs to get better. You identify those things. You build a plan to do them better, and that's how like that's how you build like sustainable success,
Agreed.
and also that's how you deal with adversity too. That
Hmm.
like I kind of got to the thought process as I got older. So it's like, man, yeah, I mean, you get stressed out about like games or starts or whatever, right? Like, I'm just going to show up tomorrow and do the exact same thing no matter how today goes. Gives you a little bit more freedom for today. Gives you a
Absolutely.
little bit
Well,
more mentality, or mental freedom, like, through
hmm
all of that. And and it's true. And that's, if you're kind of, I was very schedule routine oriented, and if you do a good job of building a routine like that, like, yeah, I mean, if I just keep showing up and focusing on getting better, then I'll like where I'm at eventually. It may take me longer to get there, and it may
right.
not be as short of a road
But
as you'd
then,
liked, and it rarely is.
and I understand how to maintain that.
Yeah, amen, amen. So, all right, thank you guys for checking out this episode. Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you liked it, drop us a comment, thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. If any topics that you want to throw out for the future, this sparked any sort of questions or topics that you'd like us to address, go ahead and throw those in the comments too. And we'll see you next time.